Folks, today I'm going to talk about yet another topic in running for which there's no right answer, and you'll have people on both sides of the fence, and that is fasted runs and fueled runs. So fasted runs meaning you're not taking in any type of fuel before your run, and fueled runs where they're not taking any fuel during the run itself. You will find studies supporting both. There are studies that show that if you should be doing some fasted runs, and you should be doing some especially long runs where you don't take any fuel, you'll find other studies that tell you the exact opposite. Say, no. You should always have something to eat before you go out and run, and you should be taking fuel in your long runs. I will tell you for many years, I was a fan of the fasted running and taking minimal fuel during my long runs. I did that because that's kind of how I grew up in it doing it. Not that I knew it was fasted or knew I wasn't taking fuel per se. I rolled out of bed and I went out. And I just didn't take anything because I didn't know any better. So it's just kind of the way that I did it. And because that seemed to work for me, I bought into this like that. I'm now shifted. I believe that you probably should have something before you go out and work out for most of your workouts. And I'm a belief that you should probably be taking something during long runs. As I said, there's studies that support both. So you got two main fuel sources, fat and glycogen, which is sugar. There are a few other things your body uses as fuel, but for the most part, we are talking about fat or we are talking about glycogen. Now, I want to point out that fat as a fuel source is not the same as fat loss, weight loss. People say, oh, I want to burn a lot of fat in my workouts because I'm trying to lose weight. Well, yeah, running can help you lose weight, but we're talking about a fuel source. We're not talking about a weight loss strategy. So don't think about wanting to burn more fat because you lose weight. You want to burn more fat as a fuel source because it's going to make you a better runner. Fat has 9 calories per gram, which is energy. Glycogen only has 4, so fat is a much richer fuel source, more than twice the bang for the buck. The way it works, made up a little graph. It doesn't work exactly like this, but it's pretty close. You can see over on the one side, I've got 0 to 100% up at the top. On the bottom, we've got your walking all the way down to a sprint. So you can look and see that when you're just walking, you're probably burning about 100% from fat. But the harder your effort, the closer you get to the sprint, the less you can burn from fat, and the more you're going to have to go from carbohydrates as those go up. So by the time you're sprinting, fat use is hardly any. Carbohydrates is going to be very high. So why is that? Well, aerobic, and distance running is an aerobic activity, means with oxygen. The body cannot metabolize fat as a fuel source without the presence of oxygen. That's why when you start running, you start breathing hard, trying to get oxygen to the muscles. It's not so much that the muscles need the oxygen, they need the oxygen to burn fat as a fuel source so that you can be running. So aerobic with oxygen. On the other hand, glycogen, you don't need any of that. So that means that using fat as a fuel source, very rich in fuel, but it's slower. It takes a little bit longer. It's got to have that oxygen. It's got to get it to the muscles. Whereas glycogen, it can kind of get it like that. That's why the harder the effort, the more your body will just start shifting towards glycogen because it has to, because the fat is too slow to do that. So I'll give you a couple examples because you really can't force the body, I don't think, to use something. And here's why that would be. So let's say track work. So I'm here to tell you when you're doing track work, you're probably going to burn a lot of glycogen because the effort is very high. So imagine that you went 2 days and fasted. So you had virtually no glycogen in your system for your track work because your goal is to force your body to use fat. That's not going to happen. You're going to be unsuccessful in your track work. You're not going to be able to maintain the effort because at that effort, your body's saying, no. I need the quick sugar. This fat stuff is too slow. So I couldn't force my body to go that way. Likewise, anybody ever hit the marathon wall? Most of the time when you hit the marathon wall, it's because your body's out of fuel. Now, most of us, if we could burn 100% fat for fuel, most of us could probably run 1,000 miles with the amount of fat that we have. I'm not to say that everybody is fat, but even a skinny Kenyan probably has 800 or 900 miles of energy in fat on their body. But the reason you hit that wall is because it's too slow. You slow down because your body says, we just can't maintain this effort. You got to slow down. I got to have time to convert this fat. So likewise, your body's going to, I think, go to whatever fuel source it needs to use based upon the effort that you're using. So my recommendation is you should look at some pre-run fuel. That's going to be 100 to 200 easy calories of carbs. So you don't want to have a steak because that's not carbohydrate. You don't want to have something that takes a long time to digest, but you want something easy to digest. Could be a glass of orange juice, for example. That's about 120 calories, and you get a little bit of liquid. But I think you should have something before you get out and run. Will it always help? No. If you're going to go run for 30 minutes, it's probably not that big of a deal. And if you're running a little bit longer, again, I don't think it's going to force your body to use that over fat. It just helps get the system primed because you have glycogen in your liver, in your blood, and in your muscles. It's also some in your brain, but you want some of that stuff in your bloodstream to get going. Now let's talk about the long runs and fueling during those long runs. So first I want to say goal number one with long runs, if you're preparing for a marathon, is to learn how to fuel. You have to learn what works for you, how much you can take, etc. And getting that is goal one. So I don't care anything about cutting back on fuel or how much you take. You've got to learn that. It's very frustrating when, 3 days before a marathon, somebody will say, well, how many gels do you think I should take? Well, what are you taking during training? So you've got to get that figured out. So your long runs for the marathon, goal one is figuring out the fuel. But then goal two, I think, for the marathon is some fuel once you have that figured out. I do think you want to be careful that you're not taking too much. Not that I think that forces your body to use fat or lets your body use the sugar. But remember the chart I showed where the harder the effort, the more you're burning from glycogen. You could have a situation where you're taking enough fuel in your long run that it allows you to run your long run too hard. And most long runs, we're trying to get the body efficient at burning fat, but because that effort is a little bit harder, you're using a lot of sugar, you're feeling great because you just went out and killed this 18-mile long run, but the fact is you used way more sugar than we wanted to use in that long run, and you felt successful because you kind of over-fueled. So I do think you want some fuel, but once you've really learned how to fuel, I do think that you want to just use a minimum amount of fuel in those long runs. And then my final argument for why I think that you want to have something before your run and why I think you want to have something during your longer runs is you should always be training the way that you race. If you're going to be on a hilly course for a race, you want to be training on hills. If you're going to be on asphalt, you want to be on asphalt, etc. So if you're doing a race where you're planning on having some fuel before your race and you're planning on taking fuel during your run, then it probably makes a lot of sense that you ought to train that way.